and we have a plot switch. And really, community cannot lose a great person like Bob Carolyn and just continue on business as usual. So we made an executive decision. We're going to be talking about the world Bob Carolyn lived in, he moved around in, he acted in, he impacted. And I'm going to start out and ask somebody who is not from here. I don't know what he did. I'm kidding, of course. Everybody knows the story of Fastenal and how it grew from its sketchy beginnings to become a great company right here in little old Winona. But I was busy in Wisconsin or Iowa or Missouri or wherever the hell else I was. So instead, I'm going to tell you about where Bob Carolyn came from, the east end of Winona, my people. He was a great Winonan. And you can call me biased, but even more than that, he was a great Pole. And you've heard the story about how the Polish people came here in 1859 or some other year, poor as hell, no money to their names, living in little hovels along Front Street, nothing to eat, living in a shotgun shack. You know, Dad works at a small sawmill 9 months out of the year. It was pretty darn grim living out on the East End, and there's no denying it. People would look at the East Enders, the Polish, the Bohemians, and the Germans who lived on the East End and say, man, that's kind of a sad way to live. And here we are in the front foot of Mankato again. You notice all the houses jammed in there. Let me see, is there a thingy to point? Hell with it. Surrounded by piles of wood and smokestacks. It smelled terrible. It looked terrible. It was not a fun place to live. It was a nasty, short, brutish place to live. And this is a house on Front Street that I jacked up with, I think that was just Photoshop. This is about as nice as it got. This house is still here today. It's at 827 Front Street. But this was a nice one. This was really a tough place to live in. People got looked down on until about 1895, when at the corner of 4th and Carmona Streets appeared what became the Basilica of St. Stanislaus Kostka. And the rest of the city of Winona shook their heads and said, what was that? These poor Polish people giving their pennies and their hard-earned work and labor to build this huge, gorgeous temple for their God. What were they smoking? Who knew that these people, these who were good for drinking and brawling and doing the work that other people in Winona didn't want to do, how the heck did they build that? Well, I'm going to tell you. This is the Martin Bambenek family. This is my great-great-grandfather and my great-great-grandmother. They came over to Winona in 1868, and I'm going to try to point this thing again. No. Okay. I'm not going to mess with this anymore. There's great-great-grandpa. There's great-great-grandma. This dude, little here, the guy in the front, the older of the two little boys, is John Baltazar Bambenek, born 1854. Second generation Polish. Martin over there, first generation. Bill and John are second generation Polish. Martin, my great-great-grandfather, had a store at 127 East 2nd Street, East 3rd Street, where Chapter 2 Books is. It was a combination of grocery store and saloon, which was very common in Winona back then. It made sense. One Sunday morning, a transient came up and said, "Open up the saloon." "No, I will not," said Martin Bamenek. "It's Sunday." The tramp pulled out a penknife and stabbed him right in the arm. My great-great-grandfather pulled the penknife out of his arm and started going to town on the tramp. That's the kind of town Winona was back in those days. And when Martin died in 1878, he left the bar and saloon to his son, John B. Bamenek. John B. Bamenek was an unusual Polish guy because he went by his initials. Polish guys usually didn't go by their initials in Winona. He was J.B. Bamenek. He was also the father of the three founders of Peerless Chain. I'm going to get this thing here. There we go. And he lived in this house at 227 East Mankato, 227 Mankato. That building right in back of it, 770 East 5th Street, is where they founded a company called Peerless Chain. J.B. Bamenek grew up pretty rough on the streets of Winona. He was elected county commissioner in 1886 for the 1st District of Winona County. He was also elected presiding commissioner. He served for 10 years. And he was shot at, sued, cursed out, jumped out in front of a meat market by two guys with a gun. And he was the big Polak in Winona, with the exception of course, Father Pacholski. He retired at the age of 40. He was sick and tired of politics. He got a job at the water station as a low man on the totem pole and worked there for 40 years. And spent time raising his three sons, especially his whole family, but his three sons, Dick, Joe, and Al, who went on to found Peerless Chain. This is what one thing he did. He made sure all three of his sons got a high school education. This was a pretty big deal for a Polish kid back in those days, around the turn of the century. He also made sure that his sons got jobs selling things. I believe it was Dick Bamenek, the youngest, who came up with the idea. He got the patent on a Peerless chain, a chain called a Peerless chain, a tire chain that could be used to do all sorts of other things, and he was off to the races. They didn't have any money, but they had their old man's name and reputation. That name of their old man, J.B. Bamenek, got them in the door. And then the Bamenek boys went in there and made their sales pitch. Over here is the epitaph, the eulogy of Dick Bamenek on the Peerless Chain. Come on, you bleephead. There we go. It's kind of an unfortunate title there. Just basically talks about how he went around knocking on doors all across town asking for money. And he got it. He knew how to get it. The people knew him. The people believed him and his brothers. Peerless Chain succeeded not only because it was a good idea, it played to the community. And moreover, it not only played to the community, it put back into the community. And Peerless Chain still does put back into the community. I just found out that they're having their 90th anniversary over at the Armory, the History Center over there, and it's sponsored by Peerless Chain. It's a theme. The Polish people made a success of themselves, and they pay back. Another one is really simple. The Polish Stock Company, built in 1886 by Joseph Jarusek. It didn't work very well as a stock company, so the stock company broke up, and he ran it as a grocery store and mortuary for 50 years. And it was still Cato Liquor back in there. I used to buy Mad Dog there. And after front page, when he passed away in 1937, talked not only about his successful business, but how he encouraged young business people in Winona. He made something of himself. He put something back. T.J. Sikorsky, this is actually the T.J. Sikorsky Saloon, 351 Mankato, knocked down in 1935 to become the Kosciuszko School, and the first site of the hot fish shop. In 1931, Henry Kovaleski had this tavern that wasn't making any money. It was illegal to sell alcohol. He didn't want to try to sell soft drinks anymore. So he started this up as a restaurant. In 1935, he moved it out to the intersection of the highway and Mankato Avenue. He was out there with Blanche Hunter, and he was out there with the Black Horse Tavern, but he was on the clean. He was selling hot fish. But again, here's an instance of a Polish man, a Polish family, making good money, contributing something that people want, but always putting back into the community. Always mindful of where they came from. Always mindful of what they were leaving behind. And those are the second generation. And here, the hot fish shop, 51 years, and it's gone. Here are some more houses I just threw in there because I like pictures of houses. My next thing is going to concern the athletic club. The athletic club at 5th and Mankato is known as the Polish Embassy, been there since 1931, and it was founded in 1900. It was founded in 1900, and there are two separate stories of how it was founded, and they're both true. And the club moved around for years to years, and here, this is 1920, the athletic club is meeting in the basement at what is now the East Side Bar, otherwise known as the Bloody Bucket. Here is the Polish Embassy in all of its beauty, and yes, that is Stralos Hall behind it. My next story, which I'm going to read in a while, is going to be set in the athletic club. This is a scene from Stralos Bar, but look at all these guys drinking alongside the bar in 1930. Look at all the bartenders, and look at all that beer. My story is going to take us to the year, about 1931. The athletic club where two gentlemen named Henry Jazuski and Len Sloggy are going to be selling houses and insurance right up at the bar. I'm going to tell you about that. Then a couple more pictures, and I'll be done for this first one. This is the Winona that Bob Carolyn and his friends grew up in. You can see it was looking pretty rough around the edges. You can see that this is the huge block, the so-called latch block, and that grass in front of it used to be the Morgan block. Original plot, block 16. Here's another shot. I mean, downtown Winona, and I know there are people who remember this, who've seen this. Even I've seen it as a little kid when I came up here. Crappy old town on the way down. It's anything but a crappy old town on the way down today. And that's got a lot to do with people like Bob Carolyn. My point is that what Bob Carolyn was and what he did accomplish during his 85 years on the planet, a lot of that was because who he was and where he was from. That, folks, was the east end of Winona. And as a Polish guy living in Winona, I can say I'm a little bit extra proud of him. Thank you very much.
I had a rough week. Test.
Hey, this is no
Oh, turn yours off. All right, go ahead.
So, I had 3 people die on me this last week, and 1 dog. And so my writings or my readings tonight will be maybe a little bit gloomy, but they are truly what Winona is all about and was. Winona is a magical place. I don't care if you come from the East End or if you come from the West End. There is a shared experience in growing up Winona and being part of its history, this glamorous history. So this first story, I never even put on Facebook. I've never printed it. I've only read it to one other person. So, and she decided to call it The Flow. The Mississippi River doesn't rest. Hour after hour, it keeps chugging along, and it'll be churning when they put that last pile of dirt on our faces. It gets dark on that other side of living, and it takes a while to get used to life on this side. There is beauty in the sea of darkness that surrounds the dead. Things sound different, and you feel something, a knot in your stomach, an unease that life exists beyond what we've been taught. You feel yourself responding to the world you've left behind. Not that you'll listen, but the voices I hear tell me that our brains can't keep up with this modern world. No matter how hard and fast we go, we never quite get there. Shooting in the wrong direction or business as usual is what I'm thinking. It's that quiet river that we should be searching for that's right inside us. America has lost that sense of what matters in this machine-driven world. In the old days of Bishop Cotter, we shut the whole city down so we could all grieve. Bishop Cotter wasn't much for alcohol. So some of the dead folks tell me that it was a relief, as they didn't have to worry no more about incurring the wrath of the now dead bishop if he caught them drinking. Seeing what I've seen, I can only imagine what I'm going to feel when I hear the sounds of that shovel shoveling. I suppose there are a lot of interesting folks on the side of living. I wonder how long it will take me to learn how dead people talk as we sit and watch the reruns of history repeating itself as the Mississippi rolls. Bob Kierlin was a really special man. Now, I only personally met him one time. We had a wonderful conversation. But I heard the stories of Bob Kierlin from the time I was a little guy, because my mom went to high school with him. And so she walked and he walked and everybody walked in Winona back in the 50s. Not every kid had a car. And you learn to navigate these brick buildings and these alleys and these streets, and you learn to talk to your neighbors and get along with people. Winona was a special place. And Bob Kierlin was a big, big part of that. It gets dark in the alleys of old Winona. Old folks tell me the devil has been spreading his seeds as long as the town itself. Most everybody agrees that in the old days they headed to the church where priests and ministers practiced their craft of shooing away the demons sitting inside us. Bob attended that Catholic school located on 5th and Walnut, where Midtown Foods now sits. He would walk to Mass just like he walked to Cotter over on 7th Street. Bob Kierlin earned his stripes on the streets of Winona. He was born near the end of the Depression, and the frugality he was raised in never left him. He was one of 5 siblings. His father owned an auto parts store, and he would spend Saturdays counting nuts and bolts, figuring out a better way to distribute the nuts and bolts that the market demanded. Bob grew up in a house right across from the courthouse that was recently torn down. It was once home to Orrin Fruit Smith, who was the second white child born in Winona. And I asked Bob if he heard the woodwork talk. He asked if that's how a schizophrenic saw things. And his eyes registered curiosity as I asked him if I was the first schizophrenic he had ever talked with. "You are," he said, and his eyes expressed interest. That was the thing about Bob, is he kept asking and he pursued life like men who were curious about how things work. I remember thinking about St. Augustine as he talked to me. Good, better, best. Never rest until the good gets better and the better best. It was a delightful hour as we talked about his love and his time in the Peace Corps. His love, Stephanie and Mary, and his chest burst with pride as he talked of his daughters, Monique and Laura. Bob was all Winona as we walked downtown and through the neighborhoods of his youth. From the telescope in his office, a remarkable man who never stopped living. May your journey be peaceful, Bob. Now, like Mr. Bamnick, Bob didn't come from a family of money. His house over on 175, I'm sure, was nice at one time. It was direct across from the courthouse. And by the end, it was pretty. It had a lot of inhabitants, let's put it that way. It was pretty rough. Those college kids had some fun in that house. But he went looking to the Wyndham Park boys for money. He knocked on doors to get money. And the old money in this town said, "A vending machine?" They couldn't see it. So this is part of this story. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Joe, and then I got another one to close, which I think is good. You got to get out of Winona every once in a while. You just gotta, you gotta hit the road. You gotta get yourself lost in the coulees. You gotta walk through a small town and have everybody stare at you. You gotta do something to break your routine. Well, last week, Tom Nelson and Joe McGill took Cheryl and I. We went to the Hamburg Hotel. You ask, where is Hamburg? Well, it's a real podunk town, but I tell you what, they got the best. There's a little bar there. The building was built in 1869. And I wrote a story about that, and they were but this was after we came back. So on the way over to the Hamburg, I was talking to Bike Man about the suicide of Arthur Moore back in 1924, 100 years ago. He hung himself in the old barn where old man Humans had his milling operations. We were trying to figure out if it might have been his garage that was the barn that Arthur Moore hung himself in. Bike Man and Cookie's house have their house on the lands of the yeoman's mill. The mill shut down around the turn of the century, and their house was built in 1920. The garage is also part of the yeoman's lumber yard. I looked up the addresses in the old city directory, but the real old ones are like reading a foreign language when it comes to addresses. Thankfully, Winona has a great library, and Mr. Laird is thinking his money was well spent. Lots of folks got interviewed, and mostly said that Arthur seemed normal. Fatigued, but folks said he always had a little less sachet in his giddy-up. Mr. and Mrs. Yeomans adored him because it was generally thought that the Yeoman Gardens were second to none. And that was a prime place to be in social circles. He kept flowers and plants blooming year-round in their mansion. Arthur had the finest old roses in the garden of the Yeomans. I decided to head out for a walk and see some old folks who might help me find yesterday in the lands of the forgotten. It wasn't too bad out last week, and so I found myself walking. I headed out to Wyndham Park. It was quiet and cold, and the living were stuck in their homes, watching something on TV, when I saw this old man sitting in his wheelchair, deep in thought. He wasn't very tall, nor very alive. He lifted his finger and in a raspy voice said, "Hanson, my name is Yeomans. I was one of the owners of the lumber company that bore my name, Yeoman Brothers and Hodgkins. We liked this First Ward Park. We had rural roots, and land and lumber a part of who we were. This park reflected that. We used to talk out here. We came from times where we knew all about our neighbors. We had common interests, and we had our politician living in his what now the Christensen home. William Wyndham was our puppet. This was a wealthy neighborhood, but this was our park. Just us lumber boys some nights. Talk about the affairs of the world. No different than you do today. But our kids ran through its backyards and alleys. Had the tennis court right there on the corner. He took a deep breath and stared out into the night sky. It was here, out here, one night when Matthew Norton received a telegram saying his son was deathly ill and dying. All the power and money of a lumberman wouldn't bring Herbert back. Death hits everybody. Death. I've seen too much of it. I was really sad to hear that the quiet neighborhood kid died. Bob Kierland was so quiet. You could feel his smarts. But a vending machine? We didn't understand it. He had come looking for money to finance his vending machine idea that became Fastenal. We underestimated his acumen, his drive, and his intelligence. He was a financial engineer that turned screws into green dollars. He understood inventory and turnover and self-financing. He leveraged that inventory with his distribution system. Winona lost a good one, born and raised right here. I think all of us Wyndham Park boys and our spouses are going to the cathedral to pay our respects. I am planning on hanging outside and having a smoke. Mr. Yeomans, all those people stuffed into that church wouldn't be healthy for my thinking. All those prayers bouncing off the woodwork, they'll be rattling around in that church for a long, long time. I mean, you can't go into church without saying a prayer. I said, worries and prayers bounce off the woodwork and send my head spinning. He looked at me skeptically and said, you stop down after the funeral, and maybe I'll tell you about Arthur Moore.
Testing. Thank you very much, Merle. I've got another story about a couple of Winona legends themselves, and it just figures that one of them would be named Big Hank. My buddy Hank McGill was 7 years old when he passed on, 7 years old and 7 months, and I don't know how old that is in dog years, but it's just too damn short. And he gave me a jigsaw puzzle for Christmas of a train. I haven't done a jigsaw puzzle in like 50 years. I said, Hank, why did you give me a jigsaw puzzle? And he said, and I would think about Hank giving me this human Rorschach test every time I would be working on my jigsaw puzzles. He gave Cheryl one too, and she's already done with hers. But I would be thinking about Hank when I was doing that. And now I think about him all the damn time, because I'm going to tell you about a guy named Hank who was one of a kind, and a couple of guys who were one of a kind, but Hank McGill was one of a kind too, and I just really, Hank, I love you and I miss you. This is called, well, I better say something. This one's called Mexi Gets His Eyebrow Shaved. Mexi Loshek was called, his real name was either Joe, it was had to have been Joe. He just wasn't a sloppy Loshek, I guess. He was dark complected, so his nickname was Mexi, and I guess he was kind of a really wild guy. This will cheer my ass up. Here we go. Oh, here we go. I want to show you the house here. This house is right across from the Winona Athletic Club. And the place where Peerless Chain was founded, that little garage placey there, was a barber shop in the 1920s and 30s. It was Jim Yank's barber shop. Yank is spelled Y-A-H-N-K-E. Of course, I heard that. And Jim Yankee, the barber, had a tub full of beers that he would keep there. And, you know, if you're waiting there to get your hair cut, you could have a beer or two or as many beers as you needed. And so Mexi decided that he needed a haircut. He had a few and he decided he needed a haircut. Sits down in the chair. It's going to be a while, Mexi. Ah, that's okay. Whoop, gloop, gloop. passes out in the chair. So Jim Yank shaves his eyebrow off and sends him back to the bar. And nobody told him. He got to spend the rest of the night with every Polak in town who was anybody, walking around with his eyebrow shaved off. That's my story about Mexi getting his eyebrow shaved off. The story I was really going to read is called A Handshake is Worthy. It's a story about the Winona Athletic Club. It was founded about 1900 in a house on East 2nd. The athletic club was for young East End guys to have a little harmless fun before settling down and getting married. They paid dues and rented their own club rooms in various houses. By the way, all the athletic club members were not Polish. They were Bohemians, Germans, and even a couple of Englishmen in there too. It was young guys who worked hard for a living, just wanted to have a little fun involving beer and cigars. This story is about two East End Polish boys named Leonard Sloggy and Henry Jezewski. In 1920, just out of Cotter, they founded the Gate City Agency, right out of high school. Needless to say, the Gate City Agency started small, in a little agency upstairs in the Choate building. Their next-door neighbor was Dr. Aurelius Mays, who was Polish, and the first Polish mayor of Winona. They borrowed his telephone. The point of the Gate City Agency was to put working Winona families into homes and make some money. Big Hank handled the real estate, and Len handled the insurance. Gate City arranged house sales through a process called contract for deed. The buyer made a small down payment and then moved right in. He made monthly payments to Gate City. No mortgage, you pay the owner until the balance is paid. At that point, Gate City gave him the title, and Winona had a new homeowner. No bank, no transaction fees. It all stays in Winona. With people you knew, good Polish people. A handshake is all it takes if that's all you got. Business boomed, working families moved into their homes across the East End. But then came the Great Depression in 1929. And just like that, the Gate City Agency got pasted just like everything else in America. Big Hank and Len Sloggy lost their darn shirts just like everybody else. They could have called in their debts, but they wouldn't do that. That's not how J.B. Bamanick rolled. That's not how Bob Carolyn rolled. That's just not done here in Winona. Instead, they gambled. Len and Big Hank ran into an oil speculator from Oklahoma named Edward Self. They took their last dimes that they could rub together and invested it with this Oklahoma oil salesman named Self. And they hit the jackpot. In 1931, they were back in business. In 1931, they had the Polish embassy built by this time. So basically, let's do it this way. Come on, you bleep. Oh, works better if you point it that way. They look so happy. You walk in on a Friday night to the Winona Athletic Club, if you're a guy. If you're not a guy, you can't go in on Friday night. Boys only. They didn't let women become members, I think, until like the 70s, wasn't? When did Terry say it was? I mean, they had an auxiliary. The guys had to let the women do all the work somehow. Did I say that right? Yes. And Big Hank and Len would do business right there at the bar. sitting up along the bar in a seat of honor. You come up and you say, I'm looking for a house. And you know Big Hank. Big Hank knows you. Huh? And yes, he would know what house would be good for you. He would know. Well, not. Oh, he was a character. He had the true Hankness within him. I'll get there. But he'd be sitting there at the bar saying, yeah, okay, Merle, I tell you what, I've got this place out on, and we shake hands. Then he would send you down the bar to Len Sloggy, who is sitting about 5 seats down. You need some insurance. Come on in. You know, who cares if you're paying 18% interest for your new house? Because at least you're paying it to another Pollock just like you. They made bank doing this, but make no mistake, it was a service. Here, let me get over here. Okay. Bunch of junk, bunch of junk, bunch of junk. Okay. For his part, here we go. Len Sloggy and Big Hank Krzyzewski were two regular Kashubian Polish guys from Winona's East End. They became successful businessmen. You're seeing a theme here because they dealt with people they knew and understood and listened to them and promised to find them rich husbands, even if he wasn't always successful. But what he really enjoyed doing, and this is the depths of the Depression. This was constructed in, say, $1933. And I don't know how much they are today. But you'd go to the athletic club, and there are 3 separate banks of men drinking behind the bars, all by status. Okay. You got to have almost no hair to be sitting close to the bar. Unless you are Big Hank and Len, who are in their 30s, but they get to sit up there anyway because they're doing business and stuff like that. Big Hank's favorite thing to do was to walk the athletic club with a pair of scissors in his hand. You know where this is going. And he'd see you with a necktie he liked. Out comes the scissor. Boom. He cuts off your necktie, sticks it in his pocket, and hands you a $20 bill. I don't know about you. I have all sorts of junky neckties that I could wear in and stuff like that. What happened was they went on, Big Hank and Len basically split out into different areas, and their partnership did not last after the Second World War, but they had done their work. They had accomplished what they set out to accomplish, basically getting people into houses. And if you take a look across this, this big, huge mishmash of houses that they put people in. The houses may not look much from an airplane flying through the air in 1951. You can see this is, that's the Wall Street Railroad tracks, Chatfield. I've labeled them. Damn it, I labeled them. And, but to the people who lived in these houses that Len and Big Hank put them into, these houses were a really big deal. Nothing like a international company or a new city block growing straight up out of nowhere, but still pretty damn important and still something to be proud of. Thank you very much.
Sometimes the easiest things give me the greatest relief when I complete them. I really struggle sometimes. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. It's been an honor. It's always an honor to speak at the Winona Public Library. There's something. I don't know what it is. It's the woodwork. It's the people that come down here. It's the old stories rumbling through here. But this is one of my favorite places. That was Hank McGill Nelson. Okay. I've lost 3 people in the last couple weeks that brought meaning to my life. Longtime Winona State baseball coach Gary Grob was a physical education teacher of mine back in grade school. My dear friend Hank, who spoke a language all his own, and then Bob Kierlin. All 3 made a difference in who I am. Hank had this long, luxurious red hair, and he had a way with people. Hank worked his magic from the inside out. Hank had a soul. He was a rambunctious child, and like many a Winona person, he ran into some brick walls in his early days. But like so many townies, after he had tired of running into those brick walls, he became a best friend. Gary Grob coached baseball at Winona State for 35 years. And he was not only highly regarded in Winona baseball circles. Nationally, he was named Coach of the Year 7 times in the NSIC. He's a member of 5 separate Hall of Fames, one incredible coach, and a better confidant to the folks who crossed his path. The thing about death is it lingers long after the dying's done. I was sitting outside the Cathedral of the Sacred Heart, having a smoke, when I heard the friends of Bob saying goodbye. My friend Bob was being paid his last respects, and the church honored him, not with amazing grace or on eagle's wings, but they were given God warning as they sung the song, "When the Saints Come Marching In." Bob had a smile as he left, and he thanked them all as he headed into the limo for the last time. I just knew he was going to explore this brave new world he was entering, and if God existed, he was going to get to know Bob. The legacy of Bob Kierlin is going to last a long, long time. He and I retraced the steps of his life, looking for some of the things that happened in his 85 years of living. We crossed Broadway and Main on our journey through his past. It was such a beautiful park in the center of town, a place where people could escape the heat in the days before air conditioning. I would sometimes come here to read, escape my sisters, and find quiet, he said. The park brought the relaxation to the neighborhood, and I got to know the old ladies and retired folk. And it once covered the entire block before the new post office replaced the old post office, which towered over our town on Main and 4th. Progress isn't a zero-sum game. Time changes a man and his thinking. I once attended a lecture in New York for young business leaders, he said, whose featured speaker was John Kenneth Galbraith, the noted economist. I raised my eyes, and he said, "Who would have thought?" He smiled, and his eyes caught the steeple of the Methodist Church. He shivered and said, It was a cold night, and my mom wouldn't let me go watch that fire that swept through that church. I walked every day right past here on my way to school. I told them that those of us with schizophrenia might hear the sounds of that wood burning in the steeple and the thoughts of prayers screaming as the old steeple lit up the Winona night sky. It is so nice that we got sun today and that February only has 28 days. March is coming. Yeah. March is coming. Spring training has started. The Daytona 500 was last week. Spring has come. Spring is coming. We only got another month or so, and we can go back to going outside without wearing a jacket. So thank you for coming. We're open to questions. I have books for sale if anybody wants one. And thank you again.
We'd love to take any questions, though. Any questions? Yes. He very often paid cash for him, yeah. From selling previous houses. I mean, yeah, there has to be some seed money and all of that, but he was just flipping them right and left. Oh yeah, he was a sharp cookie. Yes, more questions. Yes. And where did you live? That is one of the great bar names of all times. When people come to visit me here, they say, "How did it?" I say, "I have no idea, but I'm sure it's a wonderful story." Oh, well, yeah, mhm. Yeah, and there were other people who did that. Blanche Hunter also did that sort of thing. She was a funky lady too.